I have a confession to make. When I do these videos, I get really nervous. And there's no one else even in the room. But it got me thinking, at some point we're all in the hot seat, whether we're performing, whether we're giving a speech or presentation. But for some of us, that experience is so overwhelming, we're practically immobilised by it. And this kind of performance anxiety, stage fright, often takes two flavours: the fear of being judged or the fear of being out of control. So in this video, I want to share 9 things I've learned that we can control, so things we can't control don't loom so large. When we care about what we do, it's reasonable to have some nervous anticipation. But when it's so overwhelming, so out of control, what can we do to moderate it? And to be clear in this video, I'm not talking about a generalised anxiety disorder or a neurological condition. I'm talking about an anxiety response to a specific circumstance, like performing. So for these solutions, I've taken some inspiration from cognitive behaviour therapy, which is a branch of interventional psychology. Very practical, but it's based on a couple of theories. The first is that a situation does not determine our feelings, that it's our perception, our interpretation of a situation that influences our feelings. It's a small distinction, but really important, as you'll see. And that's why two people can experience the same situation but feel very different about it. The second is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours are distinct processes. And when we automatically respond to one with the other, we can unconsciously finish up reinforcing negative cycles. But we can interrupt these cycles to positively change our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. And I'll give you an example. Imagine we're so angry we hit someone before we realise what's happened. Let's break it down. So the anger is a feeling. The violence is a behaviour or action. But what if we interrupt it with a thought? Oh, how interesting. I'm feeling very angry. I shall take a deep breath and I shall talk it through to find an alternative solution. And suddenly we've interrupted that automatic response to change our behaviour. And sometimes changing our behaviour changes the way we feel. In the same way, we can interrupt our automatic response to stage fright. We just need concrete strategies because, just get over it is not particularly useful. So with each of these tips, ask yourself, how can I create a new thought, feeling, or behaviour? Or at the very least, how can I step back from these automatic responses? And that's where you can start to take charge. Tip number 1. Now, if you really want to amplify your anxiety, try controlling everything. So this tip is about recognising our realm of influence, identifying those things we can and cannot control. And I hate to break it to you, but the only thing we truly control is our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. I bet right now you probably want to punch me. Well, interrupt that with a thought. Then there are those things we can influence. So at an audition, our appearance, our experience, our presentation can influence whether we get the job or not. On stage, our performance can influence whether the audience applauds. That's not guaranteed either. I mean, we could try bribing them, blackmailing them. Even that's not 100%. I'm not going to tell you how I know that. Then there are those things we simply cannot control, like weather that puts an audience on edge, or, a pandemic that shuts down all the theatres. So once we recognise our realm of influence, we can focus our attention on the things we can change or influence. As for the rest, we can accept it or deny it, but those things are not going to change just because we want them to. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Just a little something I learned from AA. Tip number 2. When we're fearful, our body's primed to flee. Classic symptoms of fight or flight: racing heart, shallow breath, clammy hands, dry mouth, stiff muscles, tunnel vision, foggy brain. So to change our perception, take a moment to identify each symptom. Because when we see them as symptoms rather than who I am, we recognise that they're just temporary. And if it's temporary, it can change. And while stage fright in its entirety can seem overwhelming, each symptom is actually quite manageable. If your heart's racing, slow everything else down. If your breathing's shallow, breathe deeply, slowly, deliberately. If your mouth is dry, have a sip of water. Hold it in your mouth for a while. Use some lip balm. If your muscles are stiff, stretch. Get your joints moving. Stay flexible in the knees, hips, shoulders. So if your mind's shutting down, try opening out your awareness to your peripheral vision. Think jazz hands. Because studies have shown this can actually help us access our deeper consciousness, or at least more of our consciousness. And that helps us recall the things we've learned, things we've rehearsed, muscle memory, intuition. And if nothing else, it at least opens up that tunnel vision. Then there's the facial feedback hypothesis. And yes, that really is a thing. And the theory suggests that the muscles in our face send messages to our brain to help us interpret our emotions. And that by deliberately changing our facial expression, we can actually experience that emotion. So the next time you've got the worried expression on, relax your brow, find bright, curious eyes, and a joyful expression. And this is, to be clear, it's not about faking it. It's just about stepping back into calm, or at least the symptoms of calm. So the next time you're in your happy place, make a list of those symptoms. Take a mental snapshot of how that feels so that you can recreate it next time things feel out of control. Tip number 3. One of the big things we can control is our preparation. So I'm going to break this down into 4 parts. So first of all, know your material and know it early. That way any last minute changes aren't going to throw you off. And remember, rehearsal is not where we learn our lines. Rehearsal is where we test the material, where we hone, consolidate, refine our performance, and we negotiate our performance with other actors and the director. I really like Julie Andrews' advice, and she attributes this to one of her singing teachers, and that is that an amateur rehearses until he gets it right. A professional rehearses until he can't get it wrong. And so this is about muscle memory and familiarity, and that builds our confidence. And there's something about singing a song into your body and getting show fit that makes all the difference. You know, if you wait till opening night to learn your lines, you will never have tested the material, and that will shake your confidence. And quite frankly, you deserve to feel anxious because it's just lazy. The second element here is to know your craft. Because when you don't know what you're doing, you're just failing, and that can be a real struggle. So this is about building skill, technique, and process, the how. So for acting, singing, dancing, story theory, get some training, take some lessons. These days, there are so many ways to learn that don't cost a fortune. There are really no excuses. If nothing else, reach out to a mentor. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to share what they know. I mean, that's why I created this channel. Now, they may not have all the answers, but if you ask enough people, you can start to fill in the gaps. The third part of preparation is pre-visualization. And by that, I mean treat every rehearsal as though it's a performance. Don't just mark your way through it. Rehearse at full performance level so you know exactly what energy is going to be required, and you're absolutely on top of what's going to be needed at the performance. You don't want any surprises. And practice connecting with your audience so that doesn't come as a surprise. And if you're giving a speech or presentation, try it out in front of family or friends, as mortifying as it might feel, just so you can get a sense of how it's coming across. And you can bring your awareness to any symptoms that come up, if they come up, so you can address them before the big night. The fourth part here is about creating a pre-show routine. And part of that is about knowing yourself. Are you someone who needs quiet focus before a show? In which case, make sure you're in a dressing room with like-minded people. Or are you someone who needs to expel nervous energy before a show? In which case, go for a run, work out. And again, hang around with like-minded people, as long as you're not disrupting the rest of the cast. Then there's strategies like getting to the theatre early, warming up so you know your voice is working, so you know your body's at ease. Then in the dressing room, lay out your costumes, props, makeup, cup of tea, bottle of water, whatever it is that you need, so you feel organised. In that 5-minute call, go and have a wee. You don't want to be on stage with a full bladder. The point here is that we feel much more confident when the things we can control feel under control. So get organised. Tip number 4. Now the title says it all really. And I already hear what some of you are saying, but I love my cup of coffee. It helps wake me up. If you're someone who feels anxious, this is not the time for a cup of coffee, Red Bull, any of those other options. Yes, they will give you a jolt, but it's an unfocused, uncontrolled energy that will simply exacerbate your symptoms. And if you really need to feel perky and fresh, have a good sleep. Tip number 5. I hate it when I sound like a New Age aphorism because I hate New Age a-holes, but here it is. Stay in the moment. And this is not an esoteric concept because the thing is, we cannot change the past. We can only influence the future. Unless we're truly present, we're not receptive to what's actually going on right now. So we don't want to dwell on that mistake we've just made. We don't want to dread the song that's coming up because that closes us down. We want to be in that flow state. You cannot imagine how much I hate myself right now for using these kinds of words. But this is where we trust our muscle memory and our intuition. When we're in the moment, we're more receptive to our surroundings, to other actors, the audience, that helpful voice in our head. And when we're listening and responding, we're much more flexible, much more adaptable to the unexpected. So stay in the moment. I hate myself right now. Tip number 6. Now, some of us, and I'm not saying who, we get so nervous we take out a kind of insurance policy and we telegraph to the audience, this is going to be crap, don't expect too much, take pity on me. It's just giving up. It's giving away your power. So stop being a victim. I mean, seriously, just stop it. You're worth more than that. Your cast deserves more than that. Your audience deserves more than that. So look at these other tips. You can get yourself out of this. You're in control of your own orgasm. Keep rolling if I can say that. Can I say it? One of my pet peeves, and I'm starting to realise I have a lot of them, is when people say, yeah, it's all good. Because I immediately go to, really? It's all good, deluded person? I mean, sure, maybe on balance, it's more good than bad, but it's not all good any more than it's all bad. And I'd say that to you too, because, it's the kind of friend I am. And it's important to keep in mind that mistakes are going to happen. The unexpected is going to crop up. But one mistake does not mar an entire event. So it's important to put this in perspective. I mean, if you're second chorus boy from the left, one bad high kick is not going to ruin the show. I mean, even if you're in the lead role where there are higher expectations, if you forget a line, but because you're in a good place, you can pick it up, you can improvise, you can do it gracefully, artfully, keep the audience on side, keep the show moving, then that's a win. And maybe for you, just being on stage and not crying is a win. And that's okay too, because that's a start and you can build on that. So check your expectations. If your only measure of success is perfection, then everything else, ipso facto, is a failure. And that's a lot of pressure. I mean, that's really mean. Stop being mean. I remember being in the supermarket at a festive time of year and there's a woman standing in front of an empty shelf, bawling, "Oh my God, Christmas is ruined!" And I'm thinking, oh, darling, you've really overinvested in that applesauce, haven't you? Tip number 8, slow it down. If your words are too fast, chances are you're going to stumble. So make it deliberate, determined. I mean, energized, yes, but slow it down. For me, it's the waiting to go on that drives me crazy. Once I'm out there, I'm usually fine. But when your heart's racing, your breath is shallow, your jaw is clenched, give yourself a moment to ease into it. So for instance, if it's a speech or a cabaret show, take a deep breath, eyeball your audience, introduce yourself, get the mechanism working on a non-crucial part of the performance so you feel like a well-oiled machine. Well-oiled machine. Slow it down. See, I just learned something. Now, before we get to the last tip, I was going to talk about how to refocus and reframe, but that's kind of a big subject in itself, and I can give lots of examples of that. So if you'd like to see that video, leave me a comment, and while you're there, consider subscribing. Now, this final tip is simple, but it's really worth mentioning, because if stage fright is just too much for you, you don't have to do it alone. Get some guidance, ask for some help, reach out to your medical practitioner, and if even that feels too embarrassing, ask yourself, what feels worse, the embarrassment of asking for help or that stultifying mortification of not being able to function in front of a group of people? Because it really is worth living your best life. And there is help out there, so be kind to yourself. There are all sorts of solutions, not just the ones in this video. And if you found any of this useful, leave me a thumbs up. And tell me how you put these into practice. Do you already use some of these strategies? Anyway, as always, I'm Scott Cameron. This is Inside Musicals, and thank you so much for watching. Love you. And it's important to keep in mind that mistakes are going to happen. I have a confession to make. When I do these videos, I have a confession to make. When I Tip number three. Tip number three. One of the big things we can control is our preparation. I'm going to break this. Bugger! Classic symptoms of flight or fight. Fight or flight. Fight or flight? Flight or fight. I hate myself right now for using these kinds of words. Soz, not soz. Tip number four. The title says it. Tip number four. Stay in the